Um, Sorry for the interruption. So, firstly, they take in way more sensory information. They notice subtleties in the world around them, subtleties externally, but also internally. Okay, so their feelings feel bigger to them than for a child who isn't highly sensitive, and they notice the slightest things. So, you might notice you might have one of our highly sensitive children that's constantly got a roaming pain. There's always my tummy feels funny, or my shoulder feels funny, or my eyes twitching, or all of those because they're so kind of hyper aware of what's going on internally. They also notice things like us having a slight frown on our face, or looking confused, or a tension in our jaw and our shoulders if we're feeling a bit frustrated with them. And again, some other children, A, might not notice that, and B, don't read it as a threat. Okay, their threat system, because their nervous system is more sensitive, their threat system is more highly attuned. So any little thing that somebody else might kind of brush over, or it just wouldn't feel like a big deal, or they might not even notice, our highly sensitive children are wired to notice those and to have this internal reaction to them. So the world is a very overwhelming place for them in terms of their sensory needs. They also process things far more deeply and need to know the whys behind them. The world can be, particularly if there's a neurodiversity there as well, the world can be a really confusing place for a highly sensitive child. And so they might ask more questions or ask more whys, or not be satisfied with kind of a general answer about something. They might need to know more, because the knowing more allows their system to go, okay, that makes sense to me. I understand that. And similarly, if when we're talking about the subtleties they might notice, if they're noticing that your jaw's slightly tight and that your tone of voice has changed when you're speaking to them because internally you are feeling a bit frustrated, to be quite frank, and you say to your highly sensitive child, no, I'm okay. You just need to, da 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 da. They're not happy with that. That doesn't allow them to settle. We're far better with our highly sensitive children at telling them, you're right. A part of me is feeling a bit frustrated. The parts language can be really helpful, because when it's a part of you rather than the whole of you. So hearing, yes, mummy's really frustrated just now, feels quite scary, because it feels like mummy's not in control, mummy's out of control. A part of mummy's feeling frustrated. Well, mummy's in control of her part. She's looking after her part. So that can be really helpful to take away from this. And then we have to, with that overwhelm of the environment and depth of processing and this real need to understand things so that they make sense to them, um, they also, as children, by the nature of being a child, have very little control over, I mean, it might not feel like that to you. It might feel like they are always in control and they are needing to be in control constantly. But that comes from this, they are not in control of a lot in their life, particularly if they are accessing school currently. There's a lot of the day that they are having to conform and comply and push their feelings, wants, desires, needs aside in order to, be safe within that environment, essentially. And they've also got a limited capacity because of their age and because our brains don't fully develop until we're 25 to 28 years old. So that's great because your kids have all got lots of time. But also they've still got a limited capacity to self-reflect. Okay, so when you're saying they can't tell me what's wrong, yeah, because their ability, it's called metacognition. You can Google that one. Metacognition is our ability, it's a really complex human ability to be able to notice how we're feeling, to assign meaning to it that makes sense to us, to create it in our mind so that we can verbalize it to someone else, and then to verbalize it. I mean, so many adults that I know can't even do that. So it's an awful lot to expect a child to be able to do that. And that's developmentally normal to not be able to, or have not always be able to do that. You will notice sometimes they are able to, or more able to, and sometimes not, maybe. Um, so essentially, because they aren't in control, and because there's this constant bombarding of sensory information and a need to assimilate it and process it so that it makes sense to them, we can start to build a picture that the world is really overwhelming for a highly sensitive child, and the threat of feeling overwhelmed is almost constant. Okay. So it makes sense. What we do as human beings, our psyche, start to create these protective parts, these really clever adaptations or coping strategies to help us to move around in the world in a way that is most protective for our system, that feels most safe. Now, because they're little, because they are immature in their, their brain cognition and makeup, and also just by the nature of being younger, those attempts at creating protective parts often aren't hugely appropriate or run them into trouble at other times. So let me give you examples of some protective parts, and then it hopefully will start to make more sense to you. So things like people pleasing, lots of highly sensitive children, not necessarily at home, but externally, are really good people pleasers and chameleons, because if they can make sure that the other people are pleased with them or engaged with them, that helps them to feel safe. There's someone there to potentially co-regulate with if things feel overwhelming, which, as I say, is a constant threat for somebody who's highly sensitive, this sense of overwhelm, which is horrible. It might be anger or defensiveness. It might be they might have a really strong no part, and that is it's doing a really great job of protecting them against that overwhelm. No, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not going there. No, you can't make me, is a protective adaptation because of this constant threat of overwhelm. It might look like control. It might look like inflexibility. It might look like anxiety and refusal to try new things. Okay. So those are some of the parts. There are many, many more, but those protective, adaptive parts that they've started to create from a very young age. So this is where we can come in to help them, okay? To create a toolbox of more helpful coping strategies so that those adaptive parts can kind of chill out a little bit. Okay, because they don't have to protect them quite so much. And B, to help them to understand and to live in tune with their highly sensitive nature. The more we understand about our child's high sensitivity, neurobiologically, psychologically, scientifically, what that means, the more we're going to be able to help them to navigate the world in a way that allows them to thrive and flourish rather than just feel constantly overwhelmed. And highly sensitive children are really prone to shame as well. So that's another factor that comes in with anxiety, is because, so for example, say they went to a new, I don't know, netball team. Okay, they joined a new netball team out of school and they weren't really familiar. They knew a few people there, but the adults they weren't familiar with. And they did something and they caught an adult with their subtlety seeking senses. Try saying that 10 times fast. If they catch them kind of looking at them in a strange way, or looking through them, even, they can often read like a plain face or a non-expressive face as cross. That incites shame in them. Okay, oh, I've done something wrong. Oh, that person doesn't like me. You will often hear highly sensitive children talking about how people don't like them. That can be really common because of this rejection sensitivity, because of the scanning for subtleties. So this is what we're going to start to look at today. Okay, how can we help them to navigate this constant threat of overwhelm and shame? So, any questions from that? Let's start with that. Any questions before you don't have to put that on chat. You can unmute yourselves or tell me if you've got any questions pertaining to those before we start journaling. No? We're all okay. Cool. Okay. So those of you that haven't done the journaling or a seed sowing session with me before, part of it is always journaling. And by journaling, I'm not like a dear diary. This is and kind of it's free writing. It is literally stream of consciousness thinking. So I will set a timer for 3.5 minutes for each question. And all I want you to do is listen to what the question is, see what comes up for you, and start writing. Okay, keep your pen moving. Try not to think too much. See what organically comes up for you. And if you start talking about the shopping list, or you start going off on a tangent, that's okay, because those things are your subconscious processing what's going on. And actually, sometimes when we go off on a tangent, not necessarily about shopping lists, but about other things, that gives us some really rich insight into something we hadn't thought about before. So just let your pen go and your mind wander and see what comes up for you. I might do 4 minutes for each one today, actually, because they're quite in depth. Um, Take your time, go at your own pace. There's no rush. 4 minutes is usually a good amount of time for us to go over questions. I'm going to use 3 questions today. We're going to do 2, and then I'm going to have a break to give you some more information, and then we're going to do 1 more, and then we're going to share what we've learned or our insights and findings from today. Does that feel okay for everybody? Cool. So, if you are ready, our first question is, if I can see my child as feeling overwhelmed rather than anxious, so if I can see my child as feeling overwhelmed, how else could I help them to navigate this? So, all the things that you're trying just now for anxiety, but if it's overwhelmed, what might you do differently? What might you try if your thought is they're overwhelmed in this situation? They've got, their cup's too full, there's too much going on for them. How might you help them? So, if I can see my child as feeling overwhelmed rather than anxious, how else could I help them to navigate this? I'll start timing 4 minutes now. You've got just over a minute left. Okay, just finishing the sentence or idea that you're on. And then when you've done that, taking a moment to just go back over what you've written and underline or circle or box out anything that stood out as insightful, as important, anything that was kind of repetitive, words that you used more than once. Yeah, anything that stands out to you or feels important, just go back and underline those parts. When you're ready, if you can just look up or give me a thumbs up and we'll move on to the next one. Cool. Okay, so we were talking a little bit earlier about how there's a lack of control in children's lives, and that can lead to this constant impending feeling that they might be overwhelmed. One thing we can do about that is create more certainty because it's the uncertainty of what's going to happen that increases the level of anxiety because they feel more out of control. So, the second question, does that make sense to everyone? So, the second question to journal on is, if I can see my child as lacking control and certainty rather than being anxious, how might this change how I support them? So, if I can see my child as lacking control and certainty rather than feeling anxious, how might that change how I support them? Has everyone got that? I shall start the timer now. Just over a minute left. Okay, just finishing the idea, insight, sentence you're on, and then going back and boxing out again or underlining anything that stood out as important or repetitive or something you hadn't recognized and maybe you have. Okay. I'm going to invite you to take a little break and just have a look around the room, feel your feet on the floor, give them a little wiggle, roll your shoulders, make sure you're comfortable. Have a break because that can be quite intense when we're talking about our children and their big feelings. It can bring up lots of stuff. So just give yourself a minute. And while you're doing that, I'm going to share my screen with you. Oh, that was what I wanted. We all see this document, my 5-step guide to reducing feelings of anxiety. Cool. So these are the 5 things that I talk to every parent that I work with that talks about anxiety. So you may have heard them before. About things that we want to be aware of, looking out for, and trying to support. So the number 1 is identifying and reducing stressors. If we think about our child's nervous system as being like a cup, okay, many of you have heard this before, and stress is represented by water. And when it gets to the top, that's when we see the big feelings and the big behaviors. And that for some children looks like anger, for some children that looks like shutting down or crying, and for some children that looks like high anxiety. It can also look like tics, it can look like all sorts of things it can look like. But essentially, when a child's cup is really full for a long period of time, it sits up here. So what we want to be thinking about is, in the context of your child's life, what things are consistently stressing them. Now, stress, which we talked about in our last call just before Christmas, isn't necessarily negative. Stress can be anything that makes us feel a bit buzzy or a bit fizzy. Okay, so it might even be going to a new social event which you're excited about, but just makes you feel a bit kind of butterflies and fizzy and excited. It might be something that you find really joyful, like having, you know, for your child, having a friend that they love over and they're always giggling and laughing together and having so much fun. Although that's lovely, and in some ways the giggling and laughter is reducing the stress, just the buzziness is also adding an element of stress. So when I'm talking about stress, it's anything that might feel busy, buzzy, or fizzy to their little system. And I don't recommend you doing it now this minute, but after this call at another point, just really thinking about everything in their life just now, what things are adding stress, and how could you either get rid of those, reduce those, or support those in a different way to make them feel slightly easier. So get rid of those, reduce those, or support them in a way that makes things feel slightly easier. because when you've got more room in your cup, you've got more margin for error. So things that felt overwhelming, remember that constant threat of overwhelm, is not going to take you into overwhelm. If your cup's only down here and you do something that's, maybe anxiety provoking, it's only going to take you to here, not to here. Help them to understand the mechanics of what's going on inside them so that they feel that this uncomfortable response, although frustrating, makes sense. I'm sure most of you already do that. The thing that One of the things that keeps anxiety in place is the fear of the anxious feeling. So when we see a child that hates making mistakes or is quite perfectionistic, it's not really about the making the mistake or the perfectionism. It's about the feeling that those types of situations bring on for them. So often in those situations, we'll go straight to reassurance. We'll go naturally, we'll go, yeah, but you can do that, or you're so brilliant at this, or you did that last week and you did a really good job, because we want them to see how wonderful we know that they are. And as lovely as that is, it's not dealing with the underlying thing, which is the feeling. So it's gradually getting them to move towards that feeling. Where can you feel that in your body? Oh, it's horrible to feel like that, isn't it? Oh, that horrid feeling when you feel like you can't do something or feel like you can't try something. Where is it? Is your heart or your tummy? Oh, what does it need at the moment? Would a glass of water help? Would a little cuddle help? Would a walk help? What would help? Even just a little bit. We're not saying it has to go away. We're not trying to get rid of it, but what would help? There's a really brilliant book called Hey Warrior by Dr. Karen Young, which is good for all children because it's got, as in any age, because it's got such beautiful illustrations, and you can relate to it regardless of your age. It's probably written for more like 8 to 12-year-olds. But if you've got a younger child, you can obviously help them navigate it, and put it in more simple terms for them. If you've got an older child, they'll obviously still benefit from it, and the pictures are so lovely and etc. And that really talks about the mechanics of anxiety and why it happens and what it feels like and what's going on in your body. So that can be a nice one. The third one is to depersonalize the anxiety. That comes into this sense of shame. Often when a child has felt consistently anxious for a long period of time, because everyone around them is trying to get rid of their anxiety or help them with their anxiety, there's this, oh, especially for highly sensitive children, there's this, oh, I shouldn't feel anxious. Why do I feel anxious? Why do I feel worried? Da, 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 da. When we can depersonalize it, and what I mean by that is a bit like the parts thing I talked about at the beginning. A part of you feels worried. And this book, the Hey Warrior book's really brilliant because it talks about the amygdala, which is part of our brain that's responsible for our fight flight response. So we can then talk about the amygdala. Okay. Oh, your amygdala's going off again. Oh, how can we look after our amygdala? They always remind them that their body is just trying really hard to protect them. Although it feels horrible and uncomfortable, their body's just really trying to protect them from something. And we need to show our body that actually it's a bit overreacting in this situation. It's like the smoke alarm that goes off when the toast is burning rather than when there's a fire in the house. Yeah, they've just got a really sensitive amygdala that likes to try and protect them from all sorts of things. So we can help the amygdala to calm down. The fourth one is using their stretch zone. So if you've done any coaching before or personal development work before, you might know about the comfort zone, the stretch zone, and the overwhelm zone. And in our comfort zone, we're fine, but we're not learning anything new and we're not stretching ourselves into new situations. So we're not going to flourish or thrive if we stay in our comfort zone the whole time. When we move into our stretch zone, there's just enough of that fizzy buzziness that we're coping and we're learning that we can do something new, and we learn that we achieved it, we did it, it was great. And there's that real sense of achievement there. If we push children too far into their overwhelm zone, when we're dealing with anxiety or feelings of anxiety, all they actually learn is, even though, yes, they might have got through it, but all they learn is, oh my God, that felt so awful. I never want to do it again. It was too much for me. Now, that's very easy for me to say and very much more difficult for you to gauge, okay? And there will be times where you do push your child into their overwhelm zone, and there will be times where you don't push them far enough into their stretch zone. That's because you're human and you're not inside your child. You don't know exactly what's going on. You get a good sense. But if you can think of when you're getting them to try something new, what would just be the stretch in this? You know, if the whole thing is too overwhelming, what would be one step that would really boost their confidence? So, one step towards it that would really boost their confidence, that stretches them really slightly. And when I say stretch, I don't mean stretch, stretch. I literally just mean what's a step that feels a little bit tentative, but is totally doable for them. Because the more we can build their confidence with, you did that and it was fine and you felt fine actually, didn't you? The more they're going to trust that. So taking things really slowly with highly sensitive children. And then the fifth one is because we know that highly sensitive children are predisposed to feelings of anxiety, it's really crucial to help them understand their highly sensitive nature and to live in tune with it. Now, there are great books like The Dandelion and Orchid Child by Thomas Boyce, who's a researcher in high sensitivity. There's Elaine Aron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person and the Highly Sensitive Child. She's a psychologist that kind of first coined the phrase highly sensitive and recognized it within our species. It's been recognized, ironically, within every other species for millennia, that there's always a subsect of 20 to 30% that are more sensitively tuned, but not so much in humans until kind of 40 years ago. So they're a really good place to start. And obviously, that's the work that I do. So if you did want further support in really understanding your child's own why they feel anxious, because I can give you all this information and your child is unique and complex. So obviously anything that I'm doing in a group is not necessarily going to cover everything for you today, but hopefully it will be covering some things. Because when they start to live in tune with their highly sensitive nature and really understand their highly sensitive nature, those are skills for life. That is what is going to be the protective factor against them falling into burnout, into mental health challenges, into physical health challenges. When we recognize that we are highly sensitive and we need to live a certain way. And what research tells us is that for highly sensitive children, they've got either the worst or the best outcomes. You know, if they've got serious adverse life events going on, they have absolutely the worst outcomes. And I'm not saying that any of you are in that category. That's, you know, real hardship and real abuse and all of those things. They have the very worst outcomes. What we also know about highly sensitive children, which is where you guys sit, is that when they are given the right environment and the right tools and the right understanding, they flourish more than any other child. Thomas Boyce calls them the orchid and the dandelion children. You know, orchids need very specific nutrients and environmental factors to flourish, but when they do, goodness me, aren't they amazing? Any questions on any of that? I was kind of a whistle-stop tour, but I will send you that document so that you've got it. Any questions about that before we go on to our next question? Nope. Okay. I can see some of you writing, so I will give you a second before I read out the next question to you. So maybe if you were making notes on that, just again, go back and highlight anything that stood out for you. Okay.
What was the book you said? Sorry.
Hey Warrior, was
No,
that
the one after the other one,
so
the
there's
the later one.
Thomas Boyce, he's a researcher in highly sensitive children, and he's the orchid and the dandelion.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so this is our final question for today. So it's using the information from the first two questions and these 5 steps. What could I do before, during, and after whatever the event is? So if you hold in your mind now, maybe take a second to think about something that your child consistently feels anxious about. An event, a situation, being with a certain person, going a certain place. What does something that your child consistently feels anxious about? And what I'd love you to do in the next question is to make a plan for what you might do before that event to support them, what you might do during that event, and what might need to happen after the event, knowing that they go into overwhelm very easily, knowing that uncertainty is a real trigger and the lack of control is a real trigger, and knowing all of those five things that we talked about just then. Um, I'll put that back up on the screen for you so you can see that. Um, so what can you do before, during, and after the event, given the information that I've just given you? Is everyone okay with that? Yeah? Okay. Off you go. Just FYI, it's 12:30. I'm going to run over, which is absolutely fine with me. But and if any of you do need to go, then please don't feel like you need to stay on. I'll send you the replay anyway. So just yeah, stay on if you can, but if you can't, no matter. Just under a minute left. Okay, finishing off what you were writing. I'm going back through and just highlighting anything that's important. Hey. How was that for people? Has anybody got anything that stood out that they feel called to share or any questions about anything? Now is our chance to have a little share of our insights and questions and anything else that you want to bring. And if not, that's cool too. Go on, Beth.
Thank you so much for that. It was really amazing. I feel like I went from the beginning. I wrote in the first question, I was like, I actually don't know what to do to support. And then as the question's gone on, I've got some ideas. So that was really great. I just had something that's just brought me a lot of joy to think about, which I hadn't kind of realised before. Um, so one of that last question around what can we do before, during, and after. I'm actually going away for the weekend on a retreat this weekend, and so I've had that kind of before I'm going away because my eldest gets really anxious when I'm going away. Um, and I get really anxious then when I'm going away. But it's made me think about some things I can do there, which has been really helpful timing. So I'm going to leave like a little love note on their pillows, which I'm going to draw now, which will be really really fun. But the other thing, my boys both really love it when I hold a when I've held women's circle at the home. When they've come back, they've really enjoyed me doing like smudging, saging. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
this smells so good. And I was like, God, how nice would it be if when they get home from school, we just we're just going to get rid of all the stuff of the day, like a bit of I don't know, something, but
A
something,
ritual.
yeah, like with some, like, I was thinking it doesn't have to be sage, but just something where we're going to do something with it, like a nice sensory thing, just to be like, we're just going to shrug off the day and, all of the things that might have been overwhelming or happened there, we're just going to let them drop and then we're in the home. And I feel like that kind of, if that became like a regular thing, um, if they're up for it, obviously, then that could be quite nice for all of us, just like as a little coming back home thing, coming back together again.
I think so powerful. And when you were saying that, I was thinking, gosh, if you could do that exactly more regularly or even every day when they come home from school and there's this kind of, you're home now, you're safe. I'm showing this through whatever the ritual is. It might be having a shower, getting changed, putting their comfy clothes on, whatever it is, and we do that anyway, but making it really obvious that this is, let's let school go and let's embrace just being at home and feeling that safety of the outside world not being there. Thank you for sharing that.
You.
Lovely. Any other shares? Go on, Kyra.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you so much, Jenny. That was, again, really helpful for me as well.
Thanks.
I think one of the things that jumped out at me was sort of thinking about when my son struggles, I tend to move towards him because it's really kind of, I kind of want to comfort him. I want to sort of help him. And um, it really made me think actually that when I do that, he's also he's also trying to think about my feelings as well as his own in that situation. So when he's overwhelmed with his own sort of feelings and thoughts, me coming towards him, he's then got mummy's feelings and thoughts going on as well at the same time. And often he pushes me away at that point, and I can understand now a little bit more about why that might be. So that's really kind of made me think just to kind of give him a bit more space in those moments of struggle and
Yeah.
see how that kind of, yeah. So yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you.
That's brilliant. And that's interestingly, Kyra, something that I journaled on as well. I was journaling from a place of my own highly sensitive inner child. And I was thinking about the pressures that other people might be putting on me in that moment, or the pressure that I might be putting on other people. If they're stressed and overwhelmed, what do I need to do? I might need to step back from them, exactly as you said, Kyra. I might need to deal with my own feelings. I might need to look after myself in some way to be able to hold that space for them or just not to overwhelm them with more stuff. And then it led me to thinking about mornings and how often the school morning is very an anxious time and the overwhelm of all of that. And quite often because of our own anxiety, there's this, oh, we need to get out the door. So just noticing what pressures that we are also bringing to them when they're already feeling overwhelmed, and what might we need to do with our own stuff? And it might just be noticing it to start with. That can often be the most powerful first step, just like you've said, Kyra, just that noticing, when I move towards him, he often says, go away. And I wonder whether I'm bringing more overwhelm to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that one. Anything else?
I think that resonates with me because my daughter says, "You sigh," and that's my way of trying to look like I'm calm, but I don't realize I'm doing it because it's me trying to let go, but not shout or get
Yeah.
frustrated. But it's coming out in another way, and then that's put on her, and
Yeah. And that's a hard one because what we don't want to do is be in a place where we're stifling our own
yeah,
feelings. That's going to come out somewhere later on, but it might take a bit of that might just be the before, might be explain, before the event's happening. Just having a conversation with, I was thinking about how I was even on a call today with someone who's going to help, who's helping me with all of our feelings as a family. And I realized that when I do that sigh, and you've said it before, and I just want you to know that that's me, my body trying to calm myself down.
yeah, yeah,
But sometimes just explain with that need for them to understand what's going on. We don't want to pretend we're calm, but we might want to say, yeah, because when you get stressed, because I care so much about you, my body gets a bit stressed, or a part of me gets stressed. And then I sigh, and that's trying to calm me down. So really good noticing, Laura.
yeah. Not always. I'm trying, but yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. But it's definitely one to ponder on, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any others? No? Okay. So what I would love you to do, if it feels okay, is to write in the chat one thing that you're going to take away from today's session so that everyone else can see. Because I bet when people were sharing then, you were all having kind of, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that, or oh, that's really interesting. So it's really nice if you can write one thing that you're going to take away from today, and it might jog someone else on, and also might solidify in your mind that that is the one thing that you would really like to either start doing or start noticing or read up on or whatever. But one thing you're going to take away from today's session. Using the term parts when discussing feelings. Yeah, it's can be a really powerful one. There's lots to take away, but sharing that part of me is feeling. There we go. Love that. Yeah, we don't want to be hiding our feelings from our highly sensitive children because their spidey senses are on them anyway. They know. Kyra, give space to my son during moments of overwhelm and order the dandelion and orchid book. Yeah, it's a good one. His research is fascinating. He talks about how what they've measured in highly sensitive people, highly sensitive children, is that their inner right ear temperature is higher because they think that the right part of the right frontal lobe is more active. All sorts of amazing sciencey research in there. Abby, order the two books you mentioned. Think about the stretch zone. Yeah, that's an important one. And give yourself lots of grace with that, Abby, because that's not always easy to judge what is the stretch zone and what's the overwhelm. Actually, having a conversation with your child about what feels like a step that's doable, but is a step in the right direction, get joint problem solving, getting them on board can help with that. Cool. Well, oh, I also want to introduce the permission slip to the children and me when going into new situations. I give myself permission to. Yeah, that's something we talked about on the last call before Christmas, wasn't it? This permission in new situations for it to not be okay, or to not always be chatty and push yourself forward if that feels uncomfortable, or to not. Yeah, I've been giving myself permission to be late for school. Yeah. Because it doesn't really matter. Schools are obsessed with attendance, but does it really matter? Nope. I love that. Thank you all so much for your shares and for spending your time with me this morning. I appreciate you all being here and doing that. Another invitation for you is to, if it feels helpful, do that journaling with yourself in mind, like you were saying there, Beth, with giving yourself permission. Those 3 questions, if you're talking to your inner child or your inner sensitive parts, what might they need? Have a little journal from those. I found it really helpful in today's session doing that for me. So if you get the chance and the space, journal for yourself too. Look after you. Cool. It's been so nice to see you. Take care, everybody. I'll send the replay so as you've got it, and I'll send that sheet through too, and I'll link the books that I've mentioned. Lovely to see you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Bye.